In this module, we will explore how to have those difficult conversations essential for resolving conflicts effectively. You'll learn why these conversations matter, how to prepare for them, techniques for managing emotional responses, and strategies for moving from positions to shared interests. Let me start with a scenario you might recognize. Imagine a product team where an engineer and designer strongly disagree about a feature implementation. Other team members are uncomfortable with the tension, and as the project leader, you need to step in and help resolve this conflict. Here's something that might surprise you. I welcome conflict. Conflict is necessary and healthy, and teams can't reach their full potential without some degree of conflict. In her book, Creating Effective Teams, Susan Whelan writes about 4 levels of group maturity. As teams progress through these levels, they become more productive. At the first level, nobody wants to rock the boat. Everyone takes everything in agreement, and whatever the leader says goes. In the second level, you see rebellion. People push back against the leader. You get fights and arguments. By the third level, people work together, collaborating and being productive. They're doing really well. And in the fourth level, they're anticipating the needs of others. They're proactively resolving problems and providing solutions, knowing that challenges are coming up. These maturity and group productivity levels are progressive. You can't get to level 3 unless you go through level 2. There's no skipping it. This is how humans work. If you try to avoid conflict altogether, you doom your team to level 1 with low productivity and no opportunity for improvement or innovation. Engaging in conflict productively is required for teams to do better work. When we think about conflicts like our hypothetical disagreement between the engineer and designer, we must understand something crucial. In any dispute, 3 conversations happen simultaneously. The book Difficult Conversations by Douglas Stone, Bruce Patton, and Sheila Heen outlines these 3 distinct layers. The what happened conversation, which is about disagreement on facts. The feelings conversation, emotions that are present, but often not acknowledged. And the identity conversation, how the situation affects our self-image and worth. Let's explore these a bit further. The what happened conversation is where most people focus. It's about timelines, facts, and often blame. When a feature is late or a design isn't implemented as expected, this is the conversation about who did what and when. The feelings conversation involves emotions like insecurity, fear, anger, frustration, or sadness. These emotions significantly influence how people approach conflicts, but are often pushed aside in professional settings. Then there's the identity conversation, which is perhaps the most complex and least acknowledged. This conversation deals with how the conflict challenges our sense of who we are. For example, when a designer's work is criticized, it's not just about the work. It might trigger more profound questions like, am I actually good at my job? Or do I belong on this team? This identity layer is particularly challenging in Western cultures, especially in the United States, where many people's identity is deeply tied to their work. When someone challenges our work, we feel they're challenging our worth. A senior engineer might think, if my technical decision is overruled, what does that say about my expertise that I've spent years developing? A product manager might wonder, if my roadmap priorities are questioned, does that mean I'm not good enough? Research shows that these identity concerns trigger the same brain regions associated with physical pain, explaining why workplace conflicts can feel so threatening. We're not just defending our ideas, we're defending our sense of self. In most organizations, these 3 conversations get separated in unhelpful ways. The what happened conversation happens as a group, in a meeting room or on a Zoom call. Everyone discusses the timeline, who's responsible, and what to do next. Then, the feelings conversation happens between individuals outside of that group setting. People venting to colleagues in private Slack messages or over coffee about how frustrated or undervalued they felt. And the identity conversation, that often never happens at all, or maybe only with someone's therapist or partner at home. People wrestle with those questions of competence and worth privately, which can lead to disengagement or resignation if not addressed. As leaders, we need to bring all these conversations together. One practical approach I found is to model it myself. I share my feelings using I feel statements, and I acknowledge identity issues. That vulnerability builds trust and makes others more willing to be vulnerable because they see it's safe. The key to addressing all three conversations is creating space for them to surface naturally. When I sense that identity issues might be at play, I'll sometimes acknowledge them directly, even if no one has brought them up. Let me share a practical example. Imagine your team has been working for months on a major product launch, and at the last minute, the executive team decides to postpone it due to new competitive information. Your team is devastated. If you focus only on the what happened conversation, you might say, let's document what we've learned and create a timeline for the rescheduled launch. That's important, but insufficient. The feelings conversation might reveal that team members feel betrayed, wondering why the marketing or strategy teams didn't do their jobs and find this information sooner. They might feel like leadership wasted their time and didn't value their work. And the identity conversation? This is where it gets really complex. Your engineers might question whether the product they built was good enough, or if they are failures professionally and personally. Your product manager might wonder if they should have foreseen this competitive threat. Everyone might be asking themselves whether they're contributing to a company that can execute effectively. In situations like this, I've found power in directly acknowledging these potential feelings and identity concerns. I might say, I know this postponement is not just a scheduling issue. Many of you might feel frustrated or betrayed after putting so much of yourselves into this launch. It would be completely natural if some of you questioned whether your work is valued here or even wondered about your judgment or contributions. I want you to know that this decision isn't a reflection on your incredible work or capabilities. We made this decision as an organization and will navigate the path forward as a team. When you acknowledge these deeper layers, even if people don't respond immediately, you create safety and give people permission to process their full experience together, not just the surface level facts. Preparation is crucial for difficult conversations. You've got to study and reflect. You need to outline questions to think about before initiating a difficult conversation. Consider, what's your objective? What are your triggers? What are you concerned about? What might derail you? And what's at stake for the other person? Even if your assessment turns out to be wrong, the practice of preparing will help tremendously. There's a saying, a plan never survives contact with the enemy. That doesn't mean you don't plan, because if you don't plan, you will almost certainly fail. You need to gather information and think through some facts, not just interpretations. And make sure that when you're going to have a conversation, you're not rushed. I often see people trying to cram difficult conversations into a 30-minute meeting. While I generally don't like having too many meetings on my calendar, some conversations need their proper time. When resolving a conflict or having a performance-related conversation, you must give people time to reflect, respond, and process. That's not something you can do in 15 or even 30 minutes. I've had experiences where I've been in a 30-minute meeting and someone talks for 28 minutes, and then they want me to respond meaningfully in the remaining time. That's simply not possible. These conversations deserve the runway they need to land properly. Once you've prepared thoroughly, your mindset going into the conversation becomes critical. This is where adopting what's called a learning stance can transform the interaction altogether. Instead of entering the conversation determined to prove you're right or fix a problem, approach it with genuine curiosity. This curiosity-first approach works even in challenging scenarios. For instance, when you need to criticize someone's performance, you can set the stage by saying, "We are going to practice curiosity. I've got some concerns to share, but my goal is to improve my understanding. So I'm going to ask you some questions. I want you to practice curiosity and ask questions of me too." Saying this directly can disarm many potential problems. It shifts the conversation from potentially adversarial to collaborative. You're not there to judge or pronounce a verdict. You're there to learn and understand. As your conversation unfolds, it's essential to stay attuned to emotional responses, both yours and the other person's. Our bodies often signal when we're becoming defensive or stressed before our conscious mind realizes it. Learn to recognize emotional triggers. If you see someone getting defensive, crossing their arms, leaning back, breathing more shallowly, take it as valuable information, not an obstruction. These are signs that the conversation has touched on something important. If you notice these reactions in yourself, have some techniques ready. Deep breathing, counting silently, or having a go-to centering phrase can help you remain present and thoughtful. When you see others experiencing emotional triggers, validate without necessarily agreeing. You might say, "I hear you. It sounds like this is a difficult topic for you." Then you might suggest a brief pause by saying, "You know what? This is important, and I want to make sure we have the space to process it. Let's take 10 minutes and reconvene." Or, "Let's come back to this tomorrow after we've had some time to reflect." I'm a big believer in the power of sleeping on complex issues. There's that common advice, never go to bed angry, and I understand the sentiment. But sometimes sleeping on something helps. You come back the next day, and it seems way less overwhelming. Your unconscious mind has had time to process, and solutions often emerge more naturally. I have some communication techniques to help keep the discussion productive and respectful as your conversation continues. The most important rule is to avoid escalating or dismissing people's feelings. Don't try to change the subject if somebody's saying something that seems off topic. It probably matters to them for a reason you don't yet understand. Remember, what they say may not be what's happening beneath the surface. They might be talking about facts or timelines, but what they're trying to communicate is a feeling or identity issue. As a leader, you must listen for those deeper currents. Be curious about what's happening beneath the surface. One of the most effective techniques is using I statements and focusing on observations rather than judgments. For example, instead of saying, "You always interrupt me in meetings," try, "When I'm interrupted in meetings, I feel frustrated because I don't get to complete my thoughts." This approach describes the situation, your response, and the impact without accusing or assigning blame. Paraphrasing is another powerful tool. It demonstrates you're listening and gives the other person a chance to clarify if needed. For instance, you might say, "So what I'm hearing is that you're concerned about the timeline because you want to ensure quality isn't compromised. Is that right?" A powerful framework that deserves special attention is separating intentions from impact. This distinction allows both parties to honor their experiences without dismissing either perspective. Here's an example that illustrates this approach. "I know you intended to help by taking over the project, but the impact was I felt that my capabilities were being questioned." This sentence is effective for several reasons. First, it uses an "I feel" statement rather than making accusations like, "You took over the project because you didn't trust me," which contains two "you" statements that assume motives. Instead, we assume positive intent. "I know you intended to help." Then we express the impact. "I felt my capabilities were being questioned." This creates space for the other person to clarify their intentions. "No, I'm not questioning your capabilities at all." And here's a crucial point. When they offer this clarification, accept it. Research in conflict resolution consistently shows that assuming positive intent, even when unsure the other person is being honest, creates psychological safety that allows people to be more honest and collaborative. By modeling this approach, you encourage others to separate intent from impact as well. This doesn't mean ignoring negative impacts, quite the opposite. By separating intent from impact, you can address harmful effects without putting the other person on the defensive. You're creating space where both parties can acknowledge that good intentions sometimes have unintended consequences. Let's spend more time on assuming positive intent. When somebody tells you something about their feelings, beliefs, or motivations, accept it. Don't question it, don't challenge it, don't try to prove they're wrong about their own experience. Most of the time, people are truthful about their internal states. And even in cases where someone might be mistaken or less than fully forthcoming, accepting their statement creates a foundation of trust that can lead to greater honesty over time. Think about it this way. If someone says, "I didn't mean to hurt you," and you respond with, "I don't believe you," you've essentially closed the door to resolution. You've claimed to know their intentions better than they do. Instead, you can create a path forward if you accept their stated intention while acknowledging the impact. For instance, you might say, "I believe you didn't intend that, and I appreciate you clarifying, but here's how it affected me." This principle extends beyond individual conversations. If you consistently respond to people's stated feelings and motivations with acceptance rather than skepticism, you build a culture where people feel safe being honest. If the same person says repeatedly, "I trust you," and you have these open conversations without questioning their sincerity, trust will naturally deepen. In our earlier hypothetical example of someone taking over a project, they might explain, "I know you're capable. I just wanted to help because I thought you had too much work." By accepting this explanation, you can have a productive conversation about coordination and communication in the future, rather than getting stuck in a debate about intentions. Even with the best preparation and techniques, conversations can sometimes become heated. Having a repertoire of de escalation language is invaluable. These aren't manipulative tactics, they're honest phrases that help create space for understanding. When tensions rise, try phrases like, "I'm confused about something," or "I'd like to understand your perspective better." These statements are disarming because they position you as genuinely seeking understanding rather than trying to win an argument. One simple phrase I frequently use is, "Tell me more about that." This invitation accomplishes several things at once. First, it shows the other person you're interested in their perspective. Second, it gives them space to elaborate on their thinking. And third, and this is often overlooked, it gives you time to process what they've just said if you're confused or need a moment to think. Another useful de escalation approach is explicitly acknowledging the conversation's difficulty. You might say, "I appreciate your candor on this difficult topic. It means a lot that we can talk about hard things together." This phrase validates the courage it takes to engage in challenging discussions. Don't be afraid of silence either. Our cultural tendency is to fill gaps in conversation, but sometimes a thoughtful pause doesn't raise tension. It gives everyone a moment to breathe and reflect. You can even explicitly say, "I need a minute to sit here quietly and process. If you don't mind, I'd like to do that now." And then do it. That's perfectly fine and often leads to more thoughtful responses. Research on conflict resolution shows that these de escalation techniques work because they interrupt the physiological stress responses that drives defensive reactions. By creating brief pauses and showing genuine interest, you help activate the parasympathetic nervous system, enabling more rational thinking for everyone involved. Returning to our engineer and designer in conflict, we need to develop a team culture where we trust one another and know we're on the same team, pursuing the same objectives, and are aligned. When we have disagreements about how to get there, we need to respect each other enough to listen. As a leader, I don't necessarily try to coach people through that individually. Instead, I explicitly state what's happening to the group. I might say, "Hey, everybody, we are on the same team. We have the same goals. We are serving the same customers and users. We clearly disagree about how to get there. It will benefit all of us to listen to these different perspectives and decide how we will proceed as a team. It's not one versus the other. This isn't a win-lose thing. This is about what we all agree is the best path forward." This approach comes from Lissa Adkins' book, Coaching Agile Teams, where her common refrain is take it to the team. You have a problem, take it to the team. Solve it as a team. Work together as a team. I've found that to be tremendously valuable advice. Difficult conversations are inevitable. Unresolved conflicts waste time and decrease productivity. We need psychological safety, and how you handle conflicts gives you credibility and becomes a model for the rest of the team. It gives you an opportunity to mentor other people just by having them observe you. But this means you must do the hard work in advance to learn how to engage in difficult conversations. You've got to do the hard work to learn about yourself, your biases, and your weaknesses. You need to understand your worldview and your action logic better. Work through that before these conversations arise and keep growing. In this module, we discussed that conflict isn't just inevitable, it's often necessary for team growth. Through Wieland's framework, we've seen how constructive conflict propels teams through developmental stages toward high performance. We've explored how every difficult conversation involves three dimensions: facts, feelings, and identity. This understanding reveals why conflicts feel so threatening and why effective resolution requires addressing all three layers. Armed with this knowledge, we've examined practical approaches to conflict: thorough preparation, adopting a learning stance characterized by curiosity, and employing techniques like I statements and de-escalation language when tensions rise. Your approach to conflict as a leader shapes your entire team culture. When you model openness and respect during difficult conversations, you create the psychological safety necessary for your team to navigate disagreements productively. Our next modules will tackle specific conflicts with stakeholders and within teams. For now, reflect on your current approach to difficult conversations. What personal triggers might you need to manage? How might you better address the emotional and identity aspects of conflicts? The most effective leaders embrace difficult conversations as opportunities for growth and deeper connection. With the right mindset and skills, those challenging moments often yield stronger relationships, better decisions, and more innovative solutions, ultimately unlocking your team's full potential.